After 52 games, 27 different opponents across 3 competitions, Bayer Leverkusen finally tasted defeat against Atalanta in the Europa League final. The loss was humbling, but it can't overshadow how miraculous this season really was. Not just because of the turnaround in league position, not even because Bayern's 11-year dominance was ended, but because Alonso's Leverkusen have fundamentally shifted the footballing landscape. Today, in a heavily requested video, I'm exploring Alonso's incredible tactical revolution in depth, what makes him unique in the modern game, and why our very perception of football managers might never be the same again. As you guys can imagine, I have to use the internet a lot to research and create these videos, and I don't always do that at home. I'll often sit in a coffee shop, I've even watched full games waiting at the airport, but the danger of that is those Wi-Fi networks are unencrypted and my personal information is vulnerable to hackers, and that's why I highly recommend NordVPN, the sponsor of today's video. So what NordVPN actually does is create a secure tunnel between your device and the internet, which protects you from attempts to access your data. And if you're thinking, I don't even use public Wi-Fi, this isn't for me, that's where you're wrong. Because what's stopping you from clicking a dodgy link or downloading a virus or something? That's why NordVPN goes the extra mile with its threat protection feature, which is kind of like your guardian angel of cybersecurity. It scans for potential malware and says, hey, are you sure you want to click that? Trying NordVPN is completely risk-free thanks to a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you use the link on screen, you'll get a massive discount on a 2-year plan and an extra 4 months free. Give it a go. Since the success of Guardiola's Barcelona and the Spanish national team, possession football has generally been seen as the best and most effective way to play the game. But not just any possession football. Both of those teams were built on a philosophy that had been evolving for a long time, with its roots in the Dutch total football of the 70s and Cruyff's dream team in the 90s. Today it's known as juego de posición, or positional play. Over the years we've seen many coaches base their football on this method, and today there's a whole generation inspired by Guardiola directly. But we haven't seen anything quite like this. Xabi Alonso had the privilege of playing under some of the world's greatest managers, including Carlo Ancelotti and Jose Mourinho, but undeniably there is a strong Guardiola influence, and Alonso's teams share many of Pep's positional play principles. However, Bayer Leverkusen are far from an imitation. No, this is a significant reimagining, one that sets Alonso apart from many of his peers, and I'm going to explain why. In my previous videos, I've often described positional play in terms of structure. Players spread out, each occupying their own zone to maintain regular distances between them and their teammates. They then pass the ball around this structure, often moving around zones themselves, but always retaining the necessary width and depth to create space and exploit that space. But the real magic of juego de posición is not found in the global structure itself, but the local interactions between players. What I mean by that is the individual decisions players have to make to keep the ball moving. How close do I get to my teammates? Do I play long or short? Do I turn and dribble or pass? And positional play gives the players a set of principles to navigate these scenarios, some of the most important being as follows. Occupy a space and don't intrude on other spaces. Look for triangles to find the third man. Be aware of free spaces and move into those spaces, and perhaps most importantly, always look to find the unmarked player, or the free man. And through these local principles, you end up with a cohesive team on the global level. However, we've seen somewhat of a trend away from this approach, as some coaches have sought more direct control by imposing global structures that take priority over the local principles. As an extreme example, Antonio Conte has been known to favour automation throughout his career, predefined sequences based on the location of the ball and the opponent, and these are coached relentlessly during training. On the pitch, that creates stability, but also rigidity. If things don't go to plan, it's harder for players to find their own solutions in the moment. This is the first major way Alonso is setting himself apart, because though his teams have a clear shape, he's putting the emphasis back on those local principles, giving the players a toolkit to solve problems outside of any predefined structure. A heavy touch by Hoffman is problem solved, as Grimaldo eventually moves into that free space and is able to find the free man. This principle-first approach explains why Leverkusen are so adaptable to any opponent, but it doesn't explain why they're so effective. No, that's down to the second crucial difference in Alonso's method. What really differentiates Alonso's Leverkusen and most other positional play teams is an emphasis on player proximity. Now, in recent times, getting players close together has been attributed to less positional football, for example, the so-called relationist movement. But there's no reason why you can't use principles of positional play while bringing players closer together. For example, this is a very typical passage from Alonso's Leverkusen. Players get close together and sigh through their opponents with quick passing and movement. Already, we can see several ways in which the local principles are overriding the global structures. Hoffmann and Grimaldo come closer to create passing angles, sacrificing Leverkusen's width and depth. Palacios goes ahead of Xhaka to create a triangle for the third man. And Wirtz, the left interior, sees the empty zone and attacks the right half space. These are all principles of positional play, they're just applied in a smaller zone and done spontaneously to solve a problem. However, what's not immediately clear, but what's so powerful, is the effect this has on the opponent. One of the key features of modern defences is the ability to turn a block into a press, and in my last video I explained how pressing triggers determine when to apply that pressure. Common triggers are passes to fullbacks and centre-backs since they can be easily isolated, and most teams confronted by an effective press will end up going backwards to the keeper or playing the ball long, but not Bayer Leverkusen. Alonso's team, rather than being forced backwards, almost always choose to play the ball back into pressure, and they almost always bypass that pressure. The secret here is, of course, player proximity. Because the distances are shorter, you can move the ball much quicker with just one touch. So even if every player is marked, you can get rid of it before you get caught by finding the third man. The effect of playing the ball back into pressure is that you constantly move your opponent. In this congested area, they're not just going to stand and watch, they're going to try and win the ball. And if you do this enough, it creates a kind of condensing of your opponent, particularly the midfield and forwards. And if space is condensed in one area, it's going to be open somewhere else, and Leverkusen are primed to exploit that space. As you can imagine, this is effective against teams that press high, since if you beat the press, there's a load of space in behind. And all of this might remind you of Roberto De Zerbi, since pressure baiting and third man combinations kind of became his signature. But Leverkusen don't just do this from deep, they play into pressure everywhere, no matter how high or low the opponents defend, and it usually has the same effect, forcing that condensing and creating space, either out wide or between the lines. So often you wonder how players are just unmarked, but it's because their passing has fundamentally shifted their opponent, and Leverkusen commit to this even against deep, congested defences. But the same principle applies: condense, exploit space. Now, all of this makes Leverkusen a great attacking force. They don't just get the ball into good areas, they move and disrupt their opponent. But their close possession has a crucial secondary effect, which is what allows them to dominate games and could be the most important factor in their unbeaten run. When you look at Leverkusen's defensive numbers, they are a bit of an anomaly. Despite conceding the fewest goals in the Bundesliga, they have the fewest defensive actions of any kind. The fewest tackles, fewest interceptions, fewest blocks or clearances. They defend without defending. This is of course possible because of their incredible possession phase, which more than anything keeps the ball away from their opponent. And as you might have guessed, proximity makes for a good counter-press, since you've always got numbers around the ball at near equal distances. But that's not the whole story, because despite playing into pressure so often, this whole possession system is really patient, and as Leverkusen break lines and move forward, they do so as a team. Take the wide centre-backs. Given the chance, they will always carry the ball as far up the pitch as possible, which for one gets them closer to play those quick passes, but more importantly, effectively minimises the playing area. And that's a conscious decision, because getting their defenders as close as possible to the forwards is what makes Leverkusen so dominant. The intent not just to play in tight areas, but to trap their opponents in those areas. And by counter-pressing in this way, they rarely have to defend their own third. So, from a purely tactical perspective, Alonso's system defies some common knowledge, but puts his team in a position to dominate the ball, the pitch, and the game. But having this theoretical game model is one thing, much more important are the footballers that make it reality. And you can't talk about Leverkusen's unbeaten title without acknowledging just how special this group really is. No team goes 50 games unbeaten without immense footballing quality. Throughout this team are players who are not just brilliant, but consistently brilliant. From Xhaka's metronomic control and passing to Grimaldo's taste for the sensational, Wirtz's moments of genius. It feels an injustice not to mention everybody. But ultimately, there's not much more I can say. When you watch, you feel it, and you simply enjoy.
It gets better and better for Bayer Leverkusen.
What can be explained though is the common thread within the Leverkusen squad that turns a group of incredible players into an incredible team. And that isn't simply technical quality, but game intelligence. Now, Xabi Alonso explained that Leverkusen were very strategic when it came to their transfers before the season. Of course, there was a demand for technical quality, but even more important was a player's understanding of the game. Grimaldo, Hoffmann, Boniface, and Xhaka were all signed based on this quality, and all of them became essential starters, while Stanisic and Teller, also arriving in the summer, have played important squad roles. Now, game intelligence is a very difficult thing to define, but the best way to demonstrate it is how each of these players has harmonised with Alonso's positional play. Typically, the hardest part of a system like this is not just taking your own decisions, but being aware of your teammates' decisions and adapting to those. A simple example is the relationship between Wirtz and Grimaldo. If one drifts out wide, the other goes into the half space, so they're not occupying the same zone. However, in these quick passing webs, players are making much more complex decisions in the blink of an eye. In this example, 4 players are involved, and every single movement in and out of space is recognised. It starts with Kosunu passing and moving inside, vacating a space that Hoffmann drops to fill. Frimpong then moves inside, and recognising this, Wirtz, who was going there, checks his run so they don't occupy the same space. Hoffmann again passes and fills the empty space, and finally, as Kosunu carries the ball, Wirtz stays back, occupying the space the centre-back has vacated. And the result of all of this rotation? Slicing straight through their opponent's block. Being able to communicate like this through a shared footballing language is what I call game intelligence, and with enough of it, players will find solutions on the fly without needing the coach to change the system. The players become, to a certain degree, self-organising based on a set of principles. Which is why Grimaldo isn't stuck to the touchline, but can position himself intuitively, and why Wirtz ends up all over the place. Each player's game intelligence is respected and given priority, which sort of takes us back to the beginning. The idea that this team isn't just a set of instructions issued from the top, but a symbiosis of coach, principles, and players. There was a kind of plot armor around this Leverkusen season. No matter how improbable the situation, they found a way. Many would attribute that to luck, but luck is rarely this consistent. An alternative explanation is not luck, but belief. Belief in the way that they play. Leverkusen never panic, there's no knee-jerk reaction to adversity. They stay composed, and their football becomes no less precise in its execution. And that's a result of the clear, consistent messages the players received all season long. Those of discipline, control, and patience. The question is, where do those messages come from? Of course it comes from the coaching staff, but is there more to it? Granit Xhaka has talked a lot about his relationship with Alonso, how their communication is very open, direct, and precise, and you can tell Xhaka has a lot of respect for his manager. He explains that despite everything he's achieved, Alonso wants to learn. He tries to get advice from us players and we do from him, and we learn things every day. I enjoy it more when I have a coach who's willing to listen, on and off the pitch. And as a result, a player like Xhaka doesn't just hear and regurgitate Alonso's message, he's actively invested in it, believes in it as much as his coach does. So when Alonso can't be there for parts of training or crucially on the pitch, those same messages are still being infused. And when they don't just come from above, but within, shaped by the players, they become much more powerful. No wonder they have an unwavering belief in themselves. So perhaps the lesson here is that leadership isn't just preaching your gospel, but empowering those that you lead, taking the final decision, but getting there through collaboration and learning. What's frightening is that this collective still has so much more to learn, and inevitably they'll be tested against the established powers that be. Which is why, as much as I've loved watching Leverkusen this season, and they deserve their glorious chapter in history, I can't help but feel that this story has only just begun. Thanks so much for watching. Each of these YouTube videos comes with a short bonus podcast exclusively for my Patreon members. This time I discuss whether Alonso's tactics are likely to be widely adopted and the potential for an even bigger tactical revolution on the horizon. Thanks so much to all my current members. You're really helping to support the channel and improve the quality of these videos. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then.